has been more than 2 weeks since a lockdown came into effect in 2 Nigerian states and Abuja. Keeping the lockdown in place has, however, proven a bit too much for the security agencies, and with every passing day, enforcement continues to assume various forms, including violence and suppression of fundamental rights. Significantly, there has been a sudden spike in social upheavals, particularly in Lagos and Ogun State. To join us to take a look at this is Dr. Okey Ikechukwu, Public Affairs Analyst and Executive Director, Development Specs Academy in Abuja. Dr. Ikechukwu, welcome to the morning show.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good to have you again. Happy Easter.
Thank you, Ruben.
I like this your
Good
cap.
morning. I wish you the same.
I like this your couple.
No, my doctor recommended it. Ruben, my doctor recommended the cap.
Anyway, quickly. I mean, before you joined us, we were talking about angry youths on the streets of Ogun State and Lagos. They are beginning to loot food stores. They are beginning to loot shops. In fact, in one instance, they went to the market and just carted away foodstuffs. In Lagos, young men are on the streets extorting money from people, insisting that they are hungry and that they should be given money by force. Was this foreseeable? And if it wasn't foreseeable, now that we're faced with this, what should government do to make sure that we don't have an army of hungry youths suffering from hunger virus, further complicating the COVID-19 situation?
No, I believe the first thing is to admit or point out that these are not angry youths. If you're angry, there are several other ways of expressing your anger. There are, first of all, unemployed youths, hungry youths, some of them homeless youths who begged while there was no lockdown. Above all, some of them are also unemployable youths because they had neither education nor skills with which they could earn a living. Many of them were into petty thieving or loading buses and getting daily commissions or exchanging tricycles and making a little money on the side. So let's disaggregate the fact of anger from the crisis of social failure, which is being seen now as the absence of the appropriate social safety nets for their continued survival when there's a lockdown. So these are the things to put on the table. They are not angry youths. They are hungry, poor, unemployed, unemployable, frustrated, and largely homeless youths. That's one. Two, in your introductory observations, you said that the security agencies are almost overwhelmed. I agree, and I will take it from a different angle. First of all, they are overstretched. Second, the containment of a violation is not their primary responsibility. Thirdly, they are too few in number and ill-equipped. Fourthly, they are clearly unbriefed or poorly briefed from their conduct in public, because if you see how they handle some of the presumed violators of the lockdown, you see that they are putting themselves even in greater danger than the civilian populace. They are not wearing masks. They are attacking people physically. Some of them, they hold them by the scruff of the neck. And the social distance or lack of social distance between them will come to about 1 foot. So you then wonder whether part of their brief is to ensure they commit suicide by getting infected when they apprehend people in public. So these are the things. And part of what is emerging is not just a question of anger, Ruben. Is the failure of this country over the years to make a clear and sustainable distinction between national security and defense. In defense, there's an object you're taking on. You get the security agencies, you get the military, they do X, Y, Z. National security revolves around the infrastructure for sustainable societal engagement. Health, roads, power, so many other things. These are the things. Food security. All of them are absent. So what is emerging right now is the clear proof that at least even in the last 20 years of democracy, that all we've done is compound the national security problems by not taking the appropriate steps that should be taken at the institutional and policy levels to create a population that's viable and sustainable and that can survive. So the guys in the street, if you take inventory of the demographics, if I live in Kano, and I've been begging all my life, probably for the last 5 years, I have teams of beggars whom I move around. There's nobody to beg from. If I'm in Lagos, I stay around Ojuelegba. I come out every morning, and by evening, I have a meal and probably some extra 700 naira in my pocket. All of a sudden, that disappears. In other words, if I don't go out every morning, I do not get to eat. Now I'm facing that in a lockdown. First, to begin with, I've not even been brought up as a citizen. I have no sense of the Nigerian state. I have no sense of law and order. My daily consciousness is see how you can avoid whatever will prevent you from eating. And now all of a sudden there's a lockdown. So the lack of social orientation, the lack of citizenship consciousness, in addition to poverty, inflation, hunger, and lack of physical security, all of that is what we are seeing in the streets. And we need to recalibrate. And that recalibration means, because right now we are dealing with an emergency that it's like somebody is in the theater, he's being operated upon. In addition, he's losing a lot of blood. So you're thinking of blood supply. You're thinking of the surgeon who is sweating, whose sweat must not drop on the wood, and so many other things. That's what we are faced with right now. And so in the face of this crisis, what should government do? The question is, what has government been doing? At the commencement of this crisis, we learned the initial government announcement was that 386 million, I think, was made available at the very, very beginning, sometime in February. We're not quite sure that what that went into. But by the time the billions began to roll in, 3-4 weeks after this whole thing blew open, that's when we saw isolation centers being built. Today, what has happened to the money? What evidence is there we've learned any lessons? Yes, we are seeing statistics, but the statistics are actually not so reassuring because we have low COVID figures, largely because very few Nigerians have access to testing centers. Those of them in the north will travel some 200 and something kilometers, some 400 and something kilometers. Count the number of test centers in Nigeria, you know the figures are lying. And that's why it would be dangerous even to think now of easing the lockdown. But back to the substantive question of what should be done. What should be done is that it is time for those who claim to be representatives of constituencies in Nigeria to get on the job. If people are rioting in Shomolu, there is somebody from the State House of Assembly who comes from there. There's somebody from in the House of Reps who is from there, and there's a senator for that district. Let governance begin for once. You're looking for how to distribute palliatives. Let those who have been driving about in noisy cars in the name of the people get involved actually in public administration. So it's not sufficient to cry and say that the federal government is not. The federal government is no magical establishment. Why you have representatives is that they speak for you at the federal level. If the federal level has to also come and discuss the quantity of salt in your soup, your domestic arrangement is a failure. So this is the time for those who claim to be leaders in every corner of Nigeria to step forth. Those who are looting, say you have some people looting in Makokona in Abuja, they are not imported from Benin. They are not coming from Katsina. They are not coming from Nasarawa. They are people from the area. They have parents. They have people who know who they are. How come social discipline has collapsed so completely that impunity dominates even smaller households? Ruben, those are the real core issues to take on. Not federal government all the time. Yes, the federal government has more than its own fair share of disastrous performance in all of this. No question about that. But in this instance, the federal forces are clearly overstretched. In my view, probably not sufficiently briefed. And then there is this crisis in purely domestic environments, and everybody's throwing up his hand and say, what should the federal government do? No. There are traditional rulers. There are local government chairmen. There are ward chairmen. Where the hell are they? That's my question.
Well, that's actually a very valid question because we need to see help being offered and applied at all levels of governments, and not just governments, private sector, individuals, etc. That's what we need to see. Now, you made a point when you spoke about the fact that security agencies seem to be poorly briefed. And we as the people also seem to be poorly briefed by our federal government by what is going on. For example, as of today, we don't have any clarity on exactly how long this lockdown is going to last for. Now, you've said, sir, that you support an extension in the lockdown. But I want to ask you, do you also advocate for a nationwide lockdown at this point?
Two things. I'll take the first one. The question of whether we are properly briefed or poorly briefed. You know, briefing has to operate within what you call pockets of information relevance. Who is going to brief somebody in Mushi In his area, there are about 240 people living within the kind of space where you have just 2 buildings in Abuja, in Maitama, for instance. And those 240 people, the concept of social distance is totally meaningless to them. In some of the buildings, 9 people share one convenience every morning. The kitchen is shared. The passageway, there are always at least 7 people walking across it. So these are things. Some of the solutions designed and even the information template put out are elitist and points to the class character of those managing the crisis. It's the same if you go to far places like Masaka or some parts of far-flung parts of Abuja. This whole thing is not working. And that's why I say let governance be real. Leadership and governance is about using existing structures and templates, putting in the appropriate content so that they are transmitted to where they should go. If there are local government chairmen, there are ward chairmen, there are councillors, there are House of Assembly members, House of Reps members, and senators, and other major stakeholders in the state, my question is, how else should communication take place? If Lai Mohammed comes out on national television and makes an address, it goes down on record as part of the effort of the federal government in communicating with Nigerians. And I ask, how many of these Nigerians have light at that time? How many of them watch television? Those of them who even, let's assume they have light and the majority of them are still selling something out in the street, so they fall out completely. That's why the national information loop. But assuming that you had leaders of markets, heads of motor parks, and all these other people who are elected officials acting with a sense of responsibility in their respective domains, then communication becomes real. It moves from information dissemination, the throwing out of data, to somebody giving you the full implications of doing one thing or not doing the other. These are the issues where the failures are, and that's why no matter how we choose to look at it, that communication is not likely to improve. Because you have a communication workforce that does not understand communication beyond information dissemination and without any feedback system that will able to confirm that, yes, this thing has actually reached the people. Now to the second issue you raised, which I'm not quite sure I remember right now, Leila. And that was really your substantive question. What was it again? Sorry.
Sir, I was talking to you about...
Okay, the lockdown, yes, you asked whether, yes, you asked whether the lockdown, whether we should now have a nationwide lockdown. Yes, you see, the point is not really whether you or I or Ruben or anybody likes it or doesn't like it. We should operate with facts and realism. Number one, very few people are being tested. I mean, the figures being bandied around for Abuja, at least as at Saturday, as at yesterday, was 23 in Maitama, I think 13 in Wuse. Places like Kubwa had only 1. But if you think about the demographic inclinations of these areas, people in Maitama are mostly likely to have access to testing centers and are also more likely to want to go and test. Kubwa, why should I go? The market is bubbling. Nobody has fainted. All these things they're saying. After all, I didn't travel to London. That's the psych and mentality out there. And it's not it's across the country. In states where interstate travel is banned, they've made a convenient arrangement. You come in a vehicle to the bridge that connects you to the next state, and you disembark, give some money to people who are supposed to prevent you, and then cross over and board another vehicle, so it doesn't exist. Now, the question of lockdown. For one thing, it's possible to look at the challenge and the hunger in the land and say, look, these guys who are unable to eat even under normal circumstances, if you now introduce a lockdown, they are dead. So please ease it off. And the pastors too are complaining. Their tithes are not coming in. Those of them who are technology savvy have already designed online means of sending in tithes. Meanwhile, none of them has designed an online means of laying hands, of promising miracles, of threatening to take you to heaven, whether you like it or not. These failures are not being noted. The major issue is that my questions are, is lockdown advisable given the fact that there's still a continuous and sustained spread of the virus? The answer is yes. Yes, because enough people are not being tested. Yes, because even in nations that are presumably developed and doing well and monitoring it, the death rates are still in excess of 500 every day. Yes, because we cannot, when you're faced with the consequences of leadership failure, you do not then say, okay, let us die off at once. What we are facing is the evidence of the irresponsibility of the ruling elite of the last 20 years, and that's why we must not limit the blame to the current government. What has been the state of our hospitals, our healthcare system, everything that defines the state, everything on which we've been spending when we make budgets in the last 20 years, they are all on the red, close to zero in terms of performance, and we're seeing the evidence today. So whereas the elite could do that and get away with it while it lasted, they could fly out of the country. Right now they cannot fly out. If any of them is really in a bad way, the person is likely to die. Our humanity is being thrust on our faces. People who go strutting about just because they're elected, you are a normal person, we know. You win an election probably by rigging. Then how you work changes. You disconnect from everything. You live at a level you cannot afford, even in 3 incarnations. And you maintain the illusion that when you come among your people and make an empty speech or give them some paltry thing to eat, you are a leader. All of that is coming to our face now.
If I may just
we
interrupt
must make
you,
the demands.
If I may interrupt you at this point. Last week, the Minister of Finance came up with a number of additional measures that the federal government is considering. This includes the creation of 774,000 jobs, 1,000 jobs per local government in Nigeria. And also she announced plans by the federal government to get money, support from the IMF, the World Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, the African Development Bank. And then there's been so much talk about a certain 500 billion naira intervention fund, which both the executive arm of government and the National Assembly have been considering. What's your assessment of some of these measures being considered by the federal government?
The measures we commend the federal government, it shows that somebody is thinking of what to do. That is different from commending the person for what he's doing. People are thirsty and you say, oh, they need water. It's good you're thinking about it. But you then get a basket in order to give them water. We won't commend that. Question number 1, the money gotten so far, how has it been used and what has it been used for? Number 2, the donations being made is being made by people from specific areas where poverty is doing very well, and they are giving it to the federal government to distribute. A federal government that has difficulty organizing elections or doing a census or using data for planning anything is the one that will distribute money for you. And we learned it's even been very well distributed, like frightening efficiency, knowing that physical cash is involved. So let us stop deluding ourselves. Most of the previous measures put on the table, many of them can go and be conveniently retired under contract, procurement, and job for the boys. Now, it is one thing to go and collect money. It's another thing to know what to use with it. I'm personally concerned that this money being mentioned, even if and when it comes, is not likely to translate to the thing we're talking about. 700,000 jobs could be created. Why was it not created all along? What is labor ministry? What does it exist for? Where is national planning? What are these jobs? How will you suddenly invent jobs in an unviable economy? So you're thinking of creating opportunities for expendable income, and which in itself will impact inflation, and you're fueling consumption, and consumption with low productivity is the recipe for sustained and sustainable disaster at the economic, human, and political levels. So put it all together, Ruben. This is what I see before me. You need to first of all make a distinction between jobs and reason for giving people money. Remember that under the Jonathan administration, you had, well, I'm sure you recall what it was that enabled you win. Please, we should take inventory of the beneficiaries of that program and ask ourselves how they are faring today. You remember during that time, some of them were employed as traffic wardens, and they all wore a very expensive top jacket with neon lights, indicating that they are not regular traffic wardens, but those employed under the U-Win program or something similar. Where are they today? So these delusional engagements whereby young people are brought together, you call it empowerment, you put them and use them for the visibility. Certainly there's some temporary benefit, but they are not structured into any national development plan that will put them on the budget on a permanent basis. And so poverty is only reorganized and redistributed. And what I fear in this instance, it will be the same. 700,000 jobs. Where? How? When? The elite is still living on the delusion the income, the pay packet of the National Assembly should be slashed by 75%, and the same for all state assemblies, so that we begin to build a nation. You are talking about all of these things. Nobody is looking at the fact that we are, first of all, already structured to just be a drain. There are over 500 parastatals and more are being created. All of them, once they come into place, what happens? You first begin to deal with infrastructure and they increase overhead.
Certainly, Dr.
There are things to begin to
Ikechukwu.
argue.
Well, sorry to interrupt you here, sake of time. Now, we're looking at several problems surrounding sustainable human development, but I'd also like for us to be able to touch on the solutions going forward. Now, especially in the light of COVID-19, I'd like to bring us back to the topic of conversation. We were speaking about the low testing rates, sir, and you mentioned that at the end of the day, we should not be deceived because we are not testing enough people, etc. However, there's also something to point out. We've also had a low death rate. Now, what do you think this says in correlation? If anything at all, does this mean anything to you? Or do you think that that's another thing that maybe in your eyes we're not being honest about? Because for me, this falls down a lot to education as well. There's a lot of education and sensitization that can be going on right now in communities where there could be even cases of coronavirus, and the people either don't want to call the NCDC, don't want to go to a doctor, don't want to report it, and these people end up maybe dying and we don't hear of these cases. So what is your take on the low death rate that we're seeing? Because it does look quite positive, or do you think I'm being naive?
No. On the contrary, you're being realistic. The death rate is low, and I think there's some level of scientific evidence to the effect that we have a slightly lower vulnerability based on so many things, including climate. In fact, not quite 2 hours ago, a robust discussion was going on between myself and several other people, including retired Major General Wahab, the DG of the Nigerian Army Resource Center, and Professor Bobo of UI, and several other people. And the issues are this. There are things within our environment that constitute the needed, useful, and mandatory health measures anybody who takes will survive COVID infection even when it comes. And also, you find that in our regular diet, some of the spices or food items that have been seen to be used in a cocktail to contain it in the infected cases, they are part of what some people eat on a regular basis. There's also the perception, partly confirmed scientifically, that high temperatures don't work here, are not too convenient for it. But it will be a mistake to take it for granted that that confers immunity. So going back to the substantive issue you raised, there are actually things we can do here to ensure we are safe. I mean, I suffer the if you like, cheerful inconvenience of having some strange drinks inflicted on me. I'm sure you, Ruben, this will make you laugh. Because in those days, it's children who are afraid of their parents. Now, it's parents who are afraid of their children. Imagine me, big and everything, and I was cornered and made to drink something with one watching to ensure I finished it. This is terrorism of a domestic variety, but we'll deal with that later, you know. So, so ordinary children know the world is really coming to an end, you know. So coming to the...
Are you still making babies?
The low death rate. So
are you still making babies?
Ruben, of all things. Of all things at this stage, I could be arrested for it. Come on. No, please, we've all feel that we've all performed national service.
When you were talking about children.
Let's discuss something else. No, you know, anybody who is your offspring is a child. It's like you, Ruben, now going home. Your mom or your grandmother and auntie will say, my child, are you back? And your children will look at that. Is daddy they are calling child? Do you get it? So that is in that sense I'm speaking of children. You know, so now on the truth of the matter is that we have poor statistics. With poor statistics, you can't be sure of anything anybody is telling you. Secondly, there's very low sensitization to the point that people think they should go for tests. Third, there's the invasion of religious ignorance, whereby some will tell you, oh, it is not my portion, I reject it. Now, when did it become the portion of anybody to determine what's his portion in life? And so you find when you have superstition, religious rigidity, low sensitization, illiteracy, and poverty working together, it becomes difficult to create a national groundswell for a structured and sustainable fight against a situation like what we have at the moment. That's part of the crisis. So the low death rate is not indicative of lower infection, but there might be some explanation in the fact that there seems to be a cocktail of factors that tend to minimize the quick transition from infection to death around here than in other places. But those who have gone the extreme way of saying, oh, you know, we're in Africa, it's very hot, we can't be infected, let them look at the figures. Let them note that this is an infection and that when it hits any person, it does not affect the Italian or Englishman differently from how it affects Nigerians. And the fact that even one single Nigerian has died, not to talk of 7, means that we should stop deceiving ourselves. But the issue and the crisis remains the limited preparedness of the system. The Center for Disease Control, for instance, was totally ambushed. They can say all they like on television, but the truth of the matter is that they were not equipped for this. National Emergency Relief Agency, Humanitarian Affairs Ministry, a new ministry, which has demonstrated great efficiency in money distribution. I hope that's not what it sees now as its primary assignment to the nation. But all things considered, we've lost far too much money in the last 3 weeks. Too much money that has gone into nothing meaningful. And I do hope that the investigative agencies are paying attention because they should call for an accounting of it. Notwithstanding the preemptive strike of the fire at the Treasury House, but I would rather not comment on that.
Well, maybe we'll also get around to that. But quickly, I was going to ask you, when you refer to superstition, and superstition has played a major role in our response to COVID-19, what's your take on the decision of some of the state governments to relax the restrictions for places of religious worship? In some states, now you can have Jumat prayers on Friday. Some state governors have said, well, people can go to church as long as the place is not congested and social distancing is observed. And then in terms of the role that they have been playing, some religious leaders have been making all kinds of unsubstantiated claims. Some claim that this is the Antichrist, not coronavirus. One famous pastor linked it to 5G technology. And there are pastors who have said they have anointing oil and holy water that they will, of course, make available for a fee as cure for COVID-19.
Well, I'll take it one at a time. At the level of 5G, then the pastors, and then the question of superstition. First of all, one simple fact of life is that every object radiates. Radiation is a reality. Your TV radiates. When you place your phone near the TV and a call is coming in or a text message, it interferes with the reception. All of us have experienced that. We also know that the regular phone we use, 3G, 2G, emits radiations that are harmful and can lead to cancer. And there's more than enough documented evidence on that, some of them with pictorial, showing the progressive increase of the temperature around the area where you're holding the phone and the type of radiation in place. So, but some have argued, oh, you know, this is the actual effect of 5G, but it doesn't do so and so on the cell. Let them go and look into their nuclear physics. What do you call it? Better. The truth of the matter is that people should ask themselves, why is it that nobody is allowed to build houses around high-tension cables? This is ordinary electricity, Ruben, not 5G. Because it shortens your life by the consistent emission of those high-tension cables, the surrounding area is not a livable space. Then you look at our environment. If there's a flare on the sun, solar flare will send in cosmic radiations that impact life here. Destruction of the ozone layer has allowed radiations to come in that inflict skin cancer. And if you recall, 2009, Camry, Toyota Camry, the Toyota company withdrew about 9 million pieces of the Camry model because they said they had what they call sticky pedals. What is it? That sometimes the vehicle accelerates itself by itself. They brought it back for repairs. And one of the observations made by a scientific publication was that they should pay attention to the fact that some of the chips on it may actually be facing radiation interference from cosmic rays coming from outside the Earth. Now, why am I bringing all of these pictures together? We have the incident of Quebec, where solar flares disrupted the entire national grid. We've had satellites become inactive in space because of it. So coming down to the Earth, the human body is a semiconductor. The gadgets we use on a daily basis, all of them create electromagnetic fields. So let's even assume for the sake of argument that yes, 5G doesn't do anything. 5G has an electromagnetic field that will interface with the next electromagnetic field. Now, what will be the output of that? Nobody will tell us or can't tell us. So it's presumptuous to assume that it is true that 5G has no effect. No, it does have an effect. Any competent scientist will tell you that. Molecular biology may argue all it wants, but take molecular biology to the level of elementary particles and the discussion and quantum physics, the discussion disappears completely. Let's not delude ourselves. People have taken service providers to court over mobile phones because of cancerous and other malignancies that arose from the use of it. So it is a fact of science, in my view. Of course, the statements of attributed to Chris Oyakilome, not attributed, I saw one of the tapes where he was making some very amusing claims. It's unfortunate, but I think you know, there's nothing wrong with being a pastor, but being knowledgeable is important in addition. Now, coming to the domain of religion, people speak of miracles and of what is possible and what is not. Now, they act without knowledge. They forget that you reap what you sow. You cannot live badly and then all of a sudden, all your sins are washed away just because you say you claim it. How many instances do you have in the Bible where a single disciple said, I claim anything? He always said, the will of the Lord be done. And their master, the Messiah, had told them, do the will of my Father and all will be well with you. So we have renegade people who claim to be Christians and who are therefore compounding the health problems of people who ordinarily probably will have taken certain precautions. Having said that, there was a third point which I've lost now. Ruben, yeah, you had that. There was another point you mentioned.
Yeah, what should be the role
superstition?
Superstition.
No, superstition is a very strong element here because you have an environment where, with or without COVID-19, you have a slightly unacceptable number of percentage of population that stand outside the domain of rationality in their beliefs. They will go to church and hope for something to happen. If it's not happening, they try a prayer house. They say this man is the greatest prayer warrior. Go to his own, my prayer has been answered. They go there, it's not being answered. They try a native doctor. So you find there's no real coherent conceptual framework with which they are living their lives or with which they understand reality. And so they remain eternally vulnerable, flipping from one place to the other, and most of them not amenable to any rational communication that will guide them. Now, that is where leadership comes in. Had it been we do not have the kind of leaders we have, this is when to see who will stand out. Ruben, imagine that this was going on in the 60s when our war was premier, when the likes of the big names we know in the South, North, and East were around. They'll be listened to. So how come there's nobody with the stature to be taken seriously, even in his own household? Those are the issues. So when these characters run up and down, meet among themselves, hold meetings in fancy hotels, and say they are dealing with national problems, there's an elite engagement, I wouldn't use the word conspiracy, that is now surviving without the people. And this elite engagement is being mistaken for the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And it's not about politicians. It's politicians, traditional rulers, religious leaders, part of the military, part of the security agencies, etc. And the people are left stranded out there. And that's why today, all these young men and probably young women running around and looting, they say they're angry. Look, interact with some of them at the personal level. They wouldn't be in the street if they had something to eat. Many of them wouldn't be there if they had an education or if they had a skill. Well, and you find that a lot of them were among those who had undergone at least 3 skill acquisition programs.
Well, on that
during
note,
which they were taught nothing.
On that note,
Okey Ikechukwu,
we have to thank you for joining us on the morning show today.
Thank you very much, sir.